welcome back to Ready Nerd Go. My name's Alex, his name's Enko,
Welcome, welcome.
and today we are going to be talking about character creation for tabletop RPG games. We did point towards this as a subject last time we recorded, and
Yep.
unlike the other three episodes we've done, I did absolutely no prep work, which is ironic considering last week's episode. So this is going to be more of a fly by the seat of the pants episode, purely because I was down and out with the flu and thought about what I wanted to talk about, but didn't really write it down. So if it works, let us know. If you'd rather us go back to a more structured theme, let us know. We're flexible either way.
Yeah. So
Okay.
diving right on into it. Um, you've done. I can't remember. The character creation that you've done has mostly been like you telling us the general concept and us fleshing it out
Yeah.
for you, right?
So here's a what my experience with character creation is. The first game I played, I had rolled everything, created a character. They had suggested, again, similar to what you've done. They suggested different things, different abilities, because I didn't have a copy of the book.
Hmm.
Um, that was for a D&D, some form of edition. I'm not sure which one it was. Then there was the Witcher game, which the character creation was a fun mini game in and of itself.
Yes.
And then after that, it's very much been a, hey, this is what I want to play, and then you and the others have effectively done the majority of the legwork.
Yeah. So generally speaking, like obviously there's like an infinite number of RPGs out there, and they'll have their own little tweaks on how character creation works. But generally speaking, when a player comes into a game, there's kind of a few broad categories that character creation falls into. At the simplest and easiest end, there's you have pre-made characters to play with. Like, do you remember when? I can't remember if you were actively paying
I do,
attention at that point
yeah,
or not,
I
but
do. There was a gentleman came in for a session, and the GM had said, "Hey, here's a pre-made NPC for you."
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also in games like when we were playing just the scenarios for Alien, like the short off ones, not the campaign we're playing right now, those were using pre-generated characters. And though pre-generated characters can be great because you can, like, as the GM, you can hook like their goals and motivations and backgrounds directly into the plot in advance because you already know who they are. Generally speaking, when people use pre-mades, especially for like convention player and stuff, they'll usually leave like, the name and the gender identity and that kind of stuff blank for the player to fill in, and it'll just be like all of the mechanical stuff that will be predefined. That way the player can still have a little bit of agency in their character, like right at creation. That makes sense?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. And then the Witcher has the, I guess it's not exactly a life path system, but it's approximating one. Do you know what I mean by a life path system?
I can guess based on what I went through to create The Witcher, in
Yeah,
that it's a case of you roll the dice and you pick different events that's happened to the character based on age and occupation.
yeah, pretty much. So the best examples that I know of for like true life path systems would be stuff like the Traveler games, which we've never played at our place, but are very well known, and the Burning Wheel series of RPGs. Both of them kind of use a system where you're rolling events for each kind of chunk of your character's life, and then depending on what you roll, that will determine, like, what your character did, what stat upgrades or abilities they might unlock, and that kind of things. Traveler is actually kind of infamous in that regard because it was one of the few games where your character could actually die in character creation,
Which I think is fascinatingly hilarious.
right? Because like the whole thing, the more life paths that your character goes on, generally speaking, like the more powerful the character they end up
Is
being.
But there's more risk about it too. I
Exactly.
suppose if you're doing a life pass system, you're gonna roll. I would want to roll the events, get the backstory, and then base the character from that because you don't want to spend 3 hours coming up with different ideas, which I'll come back to,
Yeah. Like
only
and
for the character to die midway through. Like
right.
not even at the session, like in session zero, so to speak.
And like life path systems can be really fun because they can dramatically change what you were intending on your character being. Like when we were, I can't remember whether it was the first or second Witcher game we played. I decided, you know what, I never play a dwarf. I'm gonna roll up a dwarf, and he's gonna be like, like a crafty little rogue and like, conniving and all that stuff. And rolling up the backgrounds for him in The Witcher, he had, I think it was 7 different romances that all ended happily, and it was like, okay, this is not who I was intending on this character being, but now he's just a Lothario bard, and that's who this is.
That is fantastic. I recall that happening is or as in the moment as it was happening, and it was fascinating to see it. Funnily enough, the that life path stuff, that kind of session was thoroughly enjoyable to me as a at the time impartial witness just watching it happen. I thought it
Yeah,
was fantastic how it was created, how things went about like that.
I'm a very big fan of it, and the Burning Wheel series of systems, which is like what is it? Burning Wheels, Burning Empires, Mouse Guard, in that genre. The way they handle it is kind of interesting because you can, like, you will roll X number of life paths, and the more life paths that you choose to roll, the more powerful your character is. But it also has the flip side, just because of the way advancement works in that system, that the more life paths that you've rolled, generally speaking, the harder it is for your character to advance. So like as like a younger character who's gone through less life paths, you're a less skilled, powerful character, but it's also a lot easier for your character to pick up new skills and advance. While if you start off with a more powerful character, you'll have a more powerful character than other people at the table, but he's also a lot more locked into who he is, and it's
You're
harder
not
to
going
have
to
him branch
change
out.
him. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a fascinating system, and out of all of the character generation styles, life paths are probably my favorite, even if they're really difficult to really design from like a game design perspective. But they're absolutely fascinating, especially because you can really tie in the setting and the world when you're using a life path system, because you can have like events and stuff that are really specific to the setting of the game you're playing in, that kind of gives your character pre-built hooks into the world as you build the character.
Yeah, I again, like, so my experience with that has been somewhat minimal. I'm assuming when you do like a life path or the burning wheel system, you tend to do it in front of the games master, so they can also then start to build hints from character backgrounds into the narrative as it's coming up.
Like generally speaking, like I prefer to do character creation as a group. Like
Anyway,
anyway, like there's a lot of times even in our group, most of the time just because of pure time management, we'll tend to build our characters separately, then bring them together, just because we're only playing for like two
couple
and a
hours.
half hours a week.
Yeah,
We want to get right to the good stuff. But for groups that you have the time to sit down and actually go through character creation together, I find the game benefits a lot from that, because like with the life path system, like you said yourself, like even as an observer, it's really interesting to see the characters like come alive and become who they're going to be. And it makes it a lot easier for the rest of the group that's building their own characters to go like, oh, okay, so like your character has like, he's gone through this, my character's gone through this, maybe like, they met each other at this specific event, or like this is when they, became friends, or like this is
yeah.
where they might have a beef with each other, or
So
like
you
you
can
can.
build the history of the characters as they're being created, as opposed to shoehorning in. Well, you're a rogue wizard, and you're a knight of some form. How would you two have met and not tried to murder each other?
Yeah, and like that's oh god, That's the one thing that drives me nuts when people just bring their characters that have been made completely independently from everybody else, and as the GM, you need to sit there and go, okay, how the heck am I going to make a plausible reason that this completely disparate group of people have decided to work together instead of just kill each other?
So here's I think shifting a little bit to the other creation systems.
Yes.
When someone does use and I use this as a D&D, the Pathfinder creation system of here's your character, here's the character sheet, go figure it out sort of thing. Like here's the books.
Hmm.
When someone does do that and either does or doesn't have a backstory, is it again? I think it goes back to the social contract we mentioned in previous episodes. Does it is it just the sort of thing that, hey, we're just going to accept that for whatever reason you have a similar motivation right now, like for
Yeah.
whatever
So
reason you're all going on the adventure together, maybe for different reasons, but you've agreed to work together.
yeah. So when I first started GMing, I put a lot of work into trying to like look at the various characters that were brought to me and figure out like, okay, maybe this character is working with this character because of this reason. I can introduce that into the story. Nowadays, I don't want to go through all that. It takes a bunch of time and detracts from the actual adventure. I just tell people right at character creation that's like, hey, this is like the general, like this is the elevator pitch for the campaign. Bring a character that has a reason to participate.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I recall when we created Ben for the Ben sounds like a bizarre name out of context. When we created Ben for the Pathfinder game, this little barbarian goblin who the entire idea behind him was he's fascinated with teeth, so he became
Hmm.
a dentist because of that. Well, why is Ben following a group? And one of the other guys is playing an ogre with magnificent tusks, and we just kind of pointed at the character and was like, there you go. He's fascinated with the teeth and he wants them, and no one can seem to get rid of him, so he's now de facto a member of the group.
Yep.
And that throwaway line has become beyond central to the character himself, and it works so well for just getting him involved and causing chaos in
Yeah,
that game.
and like everybody else onboarding that idea and incorporating it into what they're doing it has as well has led to some truly entertaining moments at the table.
Absolutely, it's he's probably easily my favorite character, purely because of how do I make this guy obsessed about teeth and yet still want to go along with what's happening.
Yeah. Now, and just to backtrack a bit for listeners who I'm assuming may not have played a D&D or Pathfinder style system before. I mean, it's likely they have if they're listening to an RPG podcast, but
But
indulge
maybe
me.
they're showing it to someone who hasn't, and hey, these guys almost know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Here's a bit of a guideline.
So generally speaking, in games like D&D, how character creation works is like the order you take these steps in doesn't really matter so much. But in games like D&D, you're generally choosing your character's ancestry, which is like, elf, dwarf, human, what have you. In some systems, there's upwards of like 30 plus options. In some systems, you have like two. And then you'll choose your like class, which is like your barbarian, your rogue, your wizard, your you know archetypes of what type of fantasy character you are and how you fight. And then in later ones, like D&D 5th edition introduced to D&D the backgrounds, which is kind of a very like generic who your character was before they became an adventurer. So like you would choose whether they were like an entertainer or a soldier or a thief or something like that, and then that'll give them small bonuses on top of their ancestry and class, which is where the bulk of their stuff comes from. Well, the bulk of their stuff comes from their class, then some of it from the ancestry and some from the background.
Ironically enough, so I recall how we had talked earlier in the episode that I didn't have a plan.
Mm.
You have just segued into the next topic I was going to bring up without knowing it. Building a character. You touched on class and equipment and the different things like that in a D&D slash Pathfinder style of character creation. And I think for a lot of people, that is the classic method of building a character. When they think of how am I going to build a character, this tends to be what I think of and what comes up. So when there is
Mm,
something like the life path system, it's fascinating to me because it's different
yeah.
or different to what I understand. When you're building a character, how important is it to settle on what you want to play early? And if you want to, you're like, you know, I don't really think this guy's a barbarian. I should have made him a rogue. Like, what options do you have at that point?
So that's entirely going to be a
That's
table to table thing.
and that's also a subject that I was meaning to bring up later. So we're going to skip past that initially.
Yeah, we'll roll
We'll,
back around to
we'll
that one.
roll back around. Uh, so when it comes to selecting the class, the personality, and the equipment, like where do you start with that? Like you personally, where do you start with that? Is it just
So
you
for
go through the book and like, hey, I want to do that this time?
yeah, so for me personally, there, and I know we touched on this a bit in one of the other episodes, but for me personally, I'll approach it in one of two ways, which are kind of drastically opposing to each other. Either I'll see some sort of mechanical widget that interests me in class or ancestry or something like that, and it makes me go, ooh, that seems really interesting. I want to play with that. What kind of character can I build around it?
Mm.
Like, for example, like if I'm reading the barbarian and I'm looking at the rage ability and going, ooh, that looks really fun. I want to play around it with that. Then it's like, okay, so barbarian is going to be the class I'm playing. What ancestry can I pick that'll like play into what I want to play around with, and then just build the character from like the mechanical ground up. The other way is when usually more when I know what type of game we're getting into and I have like a character concept in mind, which can be something like for our Pathfinder game. My character was designed from the character concept first because his whole thing was, hey, this campaign takes place like just a decade or two after the last one we were in, and in the last one we were in, one of our characters, had a child. So I wonder what it would be like to play as that child in this game, like, and how would I mechanically represent who they would have grown up to be.
So
And that latter one can be a lot, it is just a lot trickier because like with my character in our Pathfinder game, I built him, I think, like 7 different ways before I finally settled on the version of him that's actually present at the table, just because there's a lot of different ways you can mechanically represent the same concept.
that is entirely true and entirely fair. So ultimately, it comes down to, and I'm specifically thinking about myself and beginners. It's
Hmm.
find something that interests you about the mechanics of the game first, and go from that.
Yes.
You can then once you hey, so I want to taking Ben the Goblin for an example. It was very much we need a goblin. I can play a goblin. What kind of character do you want to play? And in my mind, it's like, I know I'm not going to be as fully attentive as perhaps the others,
Mm.
just by nature of what I'm working as I'm playing.
Yeah.
I was like, I feel like a barbarian would probably be the easiest one for me to do, just purely because I'm thinking Conan, strong, not necessarily smart, or can get away with being dumb and just react, as opposed to a wizard where I'd need to be aware of spells and things like that. So the nature of the character creation for me was very much based on necessity of how am I going to play, and how I'm going to be able to play is going to dictate what I'm going to want to play as. And it came out as being one of the stupidest goblins that I think we've seen, who's oddly wise and yet is almost very effective at murdering things.
Hmm. Like generally, when I'm introducing players to the hobby in general, it's really easy to get overwhelmed at the amount of options available, because like somebody will sit down and it's like, okay, well, what are my options? Well, you have like 20 different ancestries and 10 different classes and all of that stuff, and then the brain just goes, okay, I'm overloaded and I have no idea what to pick.
It's like when you go into a comic shop, I want to read a comic. What do you want to read? Like, because I can give you a comic, but if you're going to want to read it, it's a different thing. And it's to me, it's the same kind of thing. Like, I want to play an RPG. Okay, what kind of character do you want to play? Because I can
Exactly.
give you options, but if you already have an idea what you want to play, it's it's much easier to narrow it down through questions like that. So
Yeah, so like generally when I'm introducing someone to it, I won't even hand them the book right away. Like if they proactively go out and get the book themselves, great. I don't really need to worry about it. They're a go-getter. They're just going to plow through it and figure out what they want. But for the vast majority of people who need a little bit more hand-holding, it's a lot easier for everyone involved to just sit down at something and go like, okay, so like, do you want to play spellcaster, or do you want to play somebody who just like fights with like weapons and armor and that kind of stuff? And okay, so you want to be like more of a martial style character. So are you thinking bow and arrow? Are you thinking like a sword and board, maybe a big two-handed weapon? And then you can use that, question response to narrow down, okay, I think you'd really enjoy playing a fighter or a
yeah,
barbarian or a ranger or what have
and
you.
and of course, as you get into it and you get more experience, you can then look into playing a bard casting magic through different means instead of like a wizard using your typical magic pool. You can use other ways, and there's other ways to play a character that is deceptive to people, which can be part of the fun.
Yeah.
Which then builds into the next point. Where do you get your backstory ideas from in a character creation where it's mechanically based and not creating the life story of the character?
Well, saying media in general is kind of a cop out answer, but it's also true, because
No, it is. It's not a cop out answer. It's the truth.
because like
I
you bring in what you know, right? So like the more like books you've read, the more movies you've watched, the more series you've watched, like anything in your life can provide inspiration to a character. But it's helpful if you know what kind of world that you're playing in, because then you can kind of narrow your scope down to things that make sense in that world. Like if we're playing like Call of Cthulhu is old-timey investigators with, Cthulhu horror thrown in. Is
you're
set
not
in
going to bring a goblin backstory to it.
exactly, and your backstories are going to be more grounded. Like you're not going to be, the secret heir apparent of a hidden kingdom. You're going to be, yeah, I grew up in a podunk town and I'm a librarian.
Yeah, and the
But
thing is, like you said, like
yeah,
different people can be interested by exploring different things. Like, we've got a guy who enjoys playing an apothecary or a medic or that kind of character, and you can
yeah.
almost reliably assume, well, this person's going to play the medic or the apothecary or a merchant. And
hmm
when it doesn't happen, like, wait, I'm confused. What's happening?
Yeah,
Uh,
once you play with people for a while, it's very easy to go, okay, you play this type of character, you play this type of character, and then when they bring something different, it's kind of like, oh, that's unexpected. Let's see how this goes.
yeah, exactly. I and so I think there is a nature of the nature of. And give me 1 second to clear this.
Yep.
There is the nature of just being, expectations being levied with the group as it goes on. But I think by the time you've gotten to that point, you're going to know how you're creating the character. So obviously, the class is going to influence the equipment they have, and if it's you're being not led but guided in character creation, a lot of that is going to come down to the group's going to help you get your equipment. The the importance of a backstory, though, like if you say you've you decide you're going to play D&D, and I really want to play as Boromir.
Mm.
If you then create this, I'm going to use Boromir's backstory up until this point, like, and just change it a bit. Can you do that, or should you create something entirely new that's very similar? Does it really matter?
Well, that's pretty much every answer here is going to boil down to depends on the table. But in general, with stuff like that, if you want to copy, if you want, like, almost all of my characters are in some way or form inspired by another character that I've read or watched or experienced that it has influenced who this character is going to be. If I'm going to try to port in a character functionally wholesale, like if I just want to bring in Boromir to play in this game, that is something that I would very much clear with the rest of the table first, because that can really take the other players out of the experience. Because if I'm getting ready to play in our fantasy RPG with its own internal world and consistent rules and logic, and you bring in a character from a franchise that I know very well, it's going to pull me out of the experience of what we're playing in, because every time I think about your character, I'm going to be thinking about that other franchise.
Right, that makes sense.
While, inspired by, like, if you want, like, take Boromir, file the serial numbers off. Yeah, people do that all the time. I've done that on occasion. I know some people who do nothing but that. It's a perfectly fine way to play. It's,
And
you
the
want
thing,
you want to experience what that character's like.
and yeah, and I can imagine that if you wanted to play, say, hey, I want to know what happens after the war. Like if Boromir had survived, what happens after the war? And
Yeah.
this is the best way to play it. He's now called Boromos or whatever. That was a shit name, but like you've got a version of him that you can play with. That yes, it's clearly Boromir. It's just not literally Boromir because they're in a different world.
But
Have fun with it.
there is also the option too, like if you go to the group and you say, like, hey, I really want to, play out like what would happen if Boromir had survived past this point, then if the group goes, hey, you know what, that sounds like a really fun idea, then you guys can just play in Middle Earth, you can make Boromir. Everybody else can either make other canon characters or bring in their own characters that just existed but were never mentioned in the books, quote unquote. And you can just play literally what would have happened if Boromir had survived.
I think that's the magic of this hobby, is that you're limited only by the imagination and cooperativeness of the group.
Exactly. There's it's there's when people first start getting into it, because D&D is traditionally the only one that 99% of the population has heard of. It's very easy to fall into the trap of, RPGs can't do anything more than what D&D is, which is its own very specific brand of fantasy. But when you start, you know, expanding your horizons of what else is out there, then it's very fun to learn that, you can play, 1960s investigators investigating like ancient Cthulhu nonsense. You can play like hard sci-fi out in the outer space. You can play cowboys. You can play, whatever you want. Whatever you want, as long as everybody in the group buys in and the imagination's there.
You can
You can
do
play
what
it.
you can really do what you want. Now we said we'd roll back to this.
Yes.
You've got the you've created the character, you're playing in the story, and then you realize, like, I don't like this guy. Like either the I don't like the class, I don't like what I'm supposed to do with the class because it's not what I want to do, and I realize I have no interest in playing it.
Hmm.
I just I have a better idea. Like now that I've been playing for it, I have a better idea of a character, and I wish I'd thought of that instead of this. Like I'd rather be a warrior than a mage, and vice versa. So what
Hmm.
options do you have at that point? And I
So
recognize it's going to be table dependent in many
yes,
ways.
I promise I'm not going to say that at the start of every one
That,
of these
that's why I
responses.
said it for you.
So generally speaking, there's a few different options that you have. Some systems will have baked in retraining options that you can access, like in Pathfinder, for example. Pathfinder Second Edition, whenever you level up, you can swap out one of your feats for another feat. So there's that inbuilt, hey, this isn't as fun for me as I thought it would be, or this isn't, what I want anymore. I can change it out for something else. Alternatively, there's always the option that if nothing about your character is working, either from like a mechanical or a lore perspective, then you can talk to the GM and just like have your character like either he rides off into the sunset or something terrible happens to him or something happens within the fiction that you can retire playing that character and bring in a brand new character that you're hoping is what you want to play more of. Something that I like to do as a GM, especially when I'm, introducing either new players or even experienced players to a new system, is I'll tell them upright, it's like, okay, you can have one just completely free rebuild of your character. If in the first like 2 or 3 sessions you realize, hey, this is really not fun for me, then we can just completely, remake the character and we'll like retroactively adjust to the fiction that's been told to make sense with the new options. And also this is me being just more lenient in that sense and preferring to play that way. I'm also a big fan of nothing about your character actually exists until it's been introduced to the table. So if your character has an ability that you've never used and you don't want it, then yeah, just talk to me and switch it out because it's never come up at the table. So no, in the fiction, your character has never been able to do this, and it's not a problem if mechanically they can't anymore.
Right. Yeah. So that no one knows they could do it in the fiction. So you haven't changed anything. You've just had a new ability that they've never used instead, which makes a lot of sense as to why you would allow that. And
Yeah.
it's I so the reason I asked that question is because there's a game, the Alien game we're playing. I realized after about 2 or 3 sessions, like I don't think I like the character I'm playing. Like I like aspects of it for sure,
Mm.
and I love the setting. It's just I keep forgetting that he's meant to be a tech person, and it's
Yeah.
very much a like I haven't found the way into the character yet, and it being Alien, if he happens to die on this mission, that's fine. I'm not that upset by it. So I've been deliberately antagonizing the one character I know who will most likely snap and kill him if the
Yep.
situation doesn't kill him itself.
And
I I'm fine with it. I'm curious to see where this is going, and ironically enough, it's making me enjoy the character more because I'm playing him as if he doesn't care when he actually does care, and it's vastly different to the other character I have that his entire motivation is to go out in a blaze of glory, but it has to be the right time. So he's not going to willingly do it against a single goblin. It's very much going to be the right time, right place sort of thing.
yeah, and games and games like Aliens actually have a really easy, especially with the campaign we're playing, have a really easy built-in way to replace your characters
Mm-hmm.
because it's something that we tend to call like trope play, where your characters are a small subset of a larger organization. So it's really easy. Like once this mission is completed and we go back to our military unit, it's very, very simple for us to just say, okay, the character that you were playing on this mission is no longer assigned to this group. He has other duties elsewhere, and he's been replaced by this new soldier who's been assigned to your group. And it's so easy to just swap that character in like that.
Do you know what? That does make a lot more sense, and it probably would be a lot easier. But I really want to experience a damage system.
Oh, it's fun. Like, go for it. But
And so now, assuming that you're not, if you don't like the character, don't give up. There's going to be ways that you can either kill the character, have them just retire off into the sunset. I know you've spoken about that before, but
Hmm.
and you've also touched on just adjusting the character over time.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I will mention, because I've seen it happen on a few occasions, is if you're really not enjoying your character, make sure you actually tell the people you're playing with that you're not having fun. Because I've experienced on a few occasions where somebody was very much not enjoying their character, but didn't want to, be a party pooper or whatever. So instead, they just tried their best, had a miserable time, and because they were having a miserable time,
Everyone
everybody
else
else
isn't.
was, yeah,
And and
because he was, best despite the best attempts. If you don't enjoy yourself, you're not going to be that fun to be around, and it's
no,
going to be noticeable.
and that's just it. So I don't know if it's come across that I don't like the character, but I'm really enjoying the setting and the gameplay.
Yeah,
So it's one of those things where I know that eventually I'll be able to create a new character, especially when I've got a bit more time to do it and I'm not doing it, as the session's beginning, like this, and this. Yep, good enough. All right, let's go.
yeah.
Like I had no idea for the backstory. I had no idea of the way this game played. And it may, like, in hindsight, I probably should have created a more frontline character because we don't have many of those in a group that probably should have more.
Hmm.
Now
I mean, we.
that said, that maybe, I mean, that said, I'm having a great time with him being functionally useless, trying to be the frontline character
Yeah.
and still antagonizing the one person he should not antagonize because he doesn't know he shouldn't antagonize him.
It's kind of a honestly, it's a similar thing for me because like really, I'm okay with the alien setting. Like it's fine. The mechanical way the dice work really interests me, and that's
Mm.
what's kind of keeping me there. But I really have absolutely no love for the theme that we're playing, and that kind of shows up in who I made my character to be, and I've been playing into it. And the more, and it's like the worse off my character is becoming, the more I'm finding I'm enjoying it.
It it's true. Like I enjoy playing through adversity, and
Yeah,
it's the books where they just torture the characters, not like with actual torture, but they go through different things. Like, how could it get any worse? Oh wait, like that. There's a reason authors like to write those kind of things because they enjoy seeing where those characters go and what happens. And I think you touch on that with you're playing a setting that you're not super fond of. I'll be honest, I've only ever watched like a couple of Alien movies. It's a setting that doesn't typically do it for me. Like if I like when I read like science fiction and fantasy, it's always going to be more on the present day and before.
yeah.
There's not a lot of future stuff that I tend to read a lot of or enjoy a lot of. And I've no idea why that is. I have always been more fascinated with the past. If I'm reading a book and it's more likely going to be set in the 1800s or before. There's a couple of present or modern day-ish and the 1900s sort of thing. For the most part, it's sword and board, and
Hmm.
that's where my interests lie. And there are
Yep.
some people that have no time for sword and board, and they want laser pistols and lightsabers, and that's fine. Like there's going to be things you're not a fan of, but at the same time, there's still stuff for me to enjoy in the Alien system. I'm still enjoying it. It's just not what I would have expected to be playing.
Exactly. And like with our group, and like mentioned, like if you're not having fun, say something. Like with our group, with that game, there was a couple of times like until my character started going through what he's going through right now, and I actually started getting invested again. I was strongly considering just telling the group that hey, I'm not really enjoying myself on this one, so I'm going to step away from it. When you guys are done, let me know and I'll be back. And a few players have done that before, and like because one player, the Witcher system really did not appeal to him. He did not enjoy playing it at all. So he just said, "Hey guys, I'm not having fun here. Let me know when you're done with The Witcher, and I'll be back." And because we're all relatively mature, grown-up adults, it was like, "Okay, great, thanks for letting us know. we'll see you when you're back.
Yeah, there's no effect, especially with a group such as yours that's structured around the the hangout first and the game second, as
Mm.
opposed to hangout because of the game, so you're not likely to play a different type of game. You're able to, hey, I'm not into this game, I'll come back for the next one, as opposed to someone who gets together specifically to play D&D. You know what? I'm not a fan of this game. I'll come back for the next one. There won't be a next one. This is going to be a multi-year D&D thing. Oh, but I guess I'm not coming back. I guess you're not.
Yeah,
Right? Like
no, that
it's
very
that
much shows up in games that like are just D&D. If you don't enjoy D&D and all your group wants to play is D&D, that
you
you're going
need
to
a
need to
new,
find
yeah,
another group.
that you either need a new group or to find a way to make it enjoyable for you. And
Exactly.
there are multiple different ways to do that. We can touch on those in future episodes. I'm not trying to build into the next one right now. It really just depends on how you're going to approach things.
Yeah, and thinking from earlier in the episode, talking about like ways to refactor the character if you're not enjoying them, one that came to mind that I didn't mention that is kind of similar to like rebuilding them because something hasn't shown up in the fiction. One thing that I have done before, and actually did it in our previous Pathfinder game, was I was playing Oracle, which is like a divine spellcaster. Mine was focused around fire, and we had played for a few sessions, and it was like, okay, like I like the character, I like who the character is and what the character is doing and the general concept of how they play, but I'm really not enjoying this class like at all. I still want him to be a magical character who throws fire around, but the Oracle mechanics are just not working out for me. I'm not enjoying it at all. So I talked to our GM and was like, hey, this is what's going on. I want to rebuild this character as this entirely different class. Mechanically, he's going to be very different, but the fiction that he represents at the table is going to be almost the exact same because he's no longer going to be an oracle, but he's still going to be a spellcaster that predominantly flings around fire and has like he's a midliner with relatively decent armor and hit points. That's staying the same. It's just the mechanical expression of how that character is changing.
And I suppose in cases like that, it's very much a nothing really needs to change for the other players. You're just adjusting what you're doing with the. I was going
Exactly.
to say what you're doing with the toy, but what you're doing with the character.
Yeah, like what you're changing doesn't impact the other players or the fiction of the world at all. You're just changing how you engage with that fiction and the other players.
And I'm assuming in cases like that, the GMs are more like, yeah, sure, go ahead, because I don't have to change anything. People don't have to react. You're just making it more enjoyable for you in a way that doesn't impact the story that we were telling together.
Yeah, like some groups will be much stickier about that. Like I've been in groups and read about and heard of groups that don't allow any retraining at all. It's like your character is your character. If you don't like them, they retire or they die. But especially when you build up that rapport with your GM, like our main GM, he's let me get away with a lot of this like mechanical alteration and changes, mostly because he knows that I'm not doing it because I want to like get an advantage in the game, and I'm not trying to like min max who my character is. It's just, hey, this isn't the part that's fun for me. I want to do this. And generally speaking, my option, what I tend to enjoy playing, tends to be suboptimal for the game in general. So he lets me get away with it because, like, yeah, no, you're just
You're
you're
making it more enjoyable for yourself.
yeah. It's like, okay, so we're this like the Pathfinder game. I was playing a character who predominantly threw fire, and the main thing of the game was we were fighting devils who are immune to fire. And so he's like, okay, I say, you're just still throwing fire. Your character is still going to have just as much trouble as he was before. You're
still
clearly not doing
functionally
this to gain an
useless.
advantage.
Yeah, I think that goes to show. Like, I remember when we were leveling up the Pathfinder game we were playing, and one of the guys like, "Oh, hey, if you do this, it's that much better." I'm like, I recognize that,
Yeah.
and I would love to choose it, but there is no reason my idiot dentist goblin would do that as opposed to this other thing that has functionally no use, but is what I feel is more appropriate to the character. It was very much a case of, does he have like a scavenger skill or something more powerful in combat? And ultimately, it was very much like he's going to be a scavenger because that just
Yeah.
feels right, as opposed to the other option that would be great in combat, but ultimately, I don't need him to be any more of a one-man murder machine when I'm trying to flesh out the fact that he's almost entirely doing it by accident than anything else.
You know, it can be a bit of a balancing act to balance like how mechanically effective your character is versus choosing options that are entirely like fiction fluffy stuff. I always try to make sure my character is at least competent within the niche of the group that he's supposed to be competent in. But past that, it's just, hey, this seems like the more fun options. And in another game I'm playing in, my character is, he's functionally a pirate who is spending most of his time on land right now because he's the only member of the party that is a pirate. He's just away from his main crew at the moment. I'm still taking options that are really only useful for like being in and around water and like running across like ship rigging and stuff. The odds of those coming up in like the main game we're playing are pretty low, but me choosing those flavor options isn't really impacting how functional my character is
And
in the role he's supposed to be in. So it's fine.
that's just it. Like, it, yes, you can build the character in a way that, well, he's on land, maybe he'd do this, and that's totally valid. But if
Yeah.
ultimately the plan is to go back to the rigging, then it's going to make more sense that he will eventually, become better at that side. So,
Yep.
anyway, I think we've touched on character creation, not exhaustively. I'm never going to pretend we can do anything exhaustively, but hopefully we've given some ideas, and even if it hasn't been ideas, it's illustrated the fact that creating a character can be a deeply personal thing, and you can do it however the hell you want to do it. And at the same time, maybe you need some help doing it, and people are more than willing to do that for you. There really isn't a wrong way to do it as long as you're having fun.
Exactly. And there's a lot more I'd love to touch on character creation and backstories and all of that fun stuff, but that'll have to be for a later episode.
That could easily be part two of character creation next week, because I think there's a lot more to go on now that we've touched on the basics that we can elaborate on. And hey, maybe next time we'll have an actual plan and I won't have been taken down by the flu again.
We'll see.
We'll see. Until that time, folks, carry on gaming.
Game on.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.